Although the NSA has dominated headlines when it comes to the spying on the world, its British counterpart, GCHQ, is just as complicit in the illegal surveillance grid. But it's not just the collection and storage of private data, it's also the shaping of our online experience. According to recently released documents by whistleblower Edward Snowden, British spies are using sophisticated tools to manipulate online content. Through these documents, we've learned that the agency can artificially increase traffic to a website, alter poll results, and even geolocate the IPs within an entire city. Yet despite the growing outrage in the UK over the extent of collaborative surveillance with US spy agencies, the British Parliament is rushing through legislation that further expands its surveillance powers. And nearby in Germany, the international outrage over the NSA has recently peaked as allegations surfaced implicating 2 German government employees in a spying operation run by US intelligence. In response, German Chancellor Angela Merkel ordered that the US's top CIA official immediately leave the country. The ongoing NSA leaks are also emboldening German citizens who just this week displayed anti-NSA imagery onto the US Embassy in Berlin in protest. So to break all of that down, I was joined earlier by former MI5 officer and whistleblower Annie Machon. I first asked her what German officials are doing in response to this egregious US government spying overreach.
Well, they've had a series of hearings at the Bundestag, and they've taken evidence from some of the earlier NSA whistleblowers like Bill Binney and Thomas Drake. So they are investigating it with quite some thoroughness. And I think this is seen as a threat, actually, certainly by the USA, because they recruited a spy from the German intelligence community to feed back what was going on within this committee hearing. So they are taking it seriously. I think the Germans are taking it seriously because they have to be seen to be doing so, because there's been such an outpouring of anger from the German people. Of course, within living memory, we've had both the Gestapo and the Stasi, the East German secret police, spying on citizens in this country and brutalizing them. So there's a very strong constitution in place to stop that happening again. And this is why Germany, particularly in Europe, is so angry about what the NSA and its vassal, GCHQ, which is the UK listening post, have been getting up to in Germany.
Right, and some German officials have even suggested going back to the typewriter to protect classified government information from ending up in some massive database. But Annie, you suggest that this might be exactly the type of tactic that governments will have to resort to in order to protect their sensitive information.
They're going to have to. I mean, the very fact that elected representatives can no longer be sure that they are not being bugged and being spied on is a frightening testimony to the fact that we've all lost our privacy to such a great degree. Personally, I'm going back to using a quill and parchment, I think, and carrier pigeons to send my messages.
Last month, the German government canceled a contract with Verizon after finding out that the company aids the U.S. with surveillance. And of course, many private companies are cooperating with governments to spy on its citizens. Why do you think there's so much missing outrage over private sector surveillance when these companies are the ones supplying the governments with the data?
A very good question, because this shows that we have indeed slid into an era of fascism. If you go back to Benito Mussolini's definition of fascism, which is the merger of the corporate and the state, what we have seen through the Edward Snowden disclosures is that very fact, where all the major big internet giants from the USA have been at least complicit and in many cases very willing to help the NSA and GCHQ and other intelligence agencies to spy on citizens. So, for example, things like Facebook, I've been saying for years, is a sort of spy's wet dream, because we offer up willingly all the information that the spies in the bad old days of analog era had to spend months gathering. So what we're thinking, who we're in a relationship with, who our friends are, what our activism is, what our political views are, etc., etc. So these companies have so much very valuable information, and yet they're just handing it over. So in terms of where we are as a democracy, I think we're very far down the road towards totalitarianism, towards fascism again. And I think in Germany, at least, there is an awareness that we need to move away from this US corporate hegemony. And it's not only good for democracy to ensure that we have privacy, it's not only good for the citizens to be able to learn exactly what goes on the internet, under the hoods of their computers. It could potentially be very, very good for the European community economically. And particularly in Germany, we're seeing internet companies saying, hey, look, we've got to get away from this dependency, this addiction to American companies. We can develop these new systems. We can develop new systems based on open source technology rather than these closed proprietary systems that Apple and Microsoft and all the others have been peddling for years. often in contravention, by the way, of EU laws, and they've been fined massive amounts for contravening these EU laws. So I think there is an awareness that it's good for business as well as good for privacy.
Let's talk about the GCHQ revelations that just came out from Glenn Greenwald on The Intercept, basically talking about how the agency manipulates online polls and internet content. I wanted you to break down a little bit more about what that consists of.
Well, I think this is something that Joseph Goebbels could only have dreamt of. This is the ultimate propaganda. In fact, this is really, really Orwellian, because we're looking at a fabrication of facts, fabrication of polls, fabrication even of communications where they can fake what we've written to people. So this is not just rewriting history, this is rewriting the present and, of course, by definition, thereby rewriting the future. So, for example, we all know in the West, particularly the US and the UK, our politicians are addicted to polls. In fact, they will only formulate policies if they think they will be popular so that they can get re-elected. Now, if you're in a position where you can manipulate those polls, you can manipulate what the politicians decide as policy, and you can manipulate the direction our democracies go down. So, for example, do we go to war in support of the Ukrainian government? They could have a poll on that. Everyone could say no. We could all go and demonstrate on the streets, and yet the poll can be manipulated, and suddenly the UK's at war again, illegally.
A point I was hoping you could expand on is the oversight of spies in the UK and exactly how much they can get away with.
Spies in the UK can get away with pretty much anything they want. Now, we, of course, live in a notional democracy. We have these systems in place where there is a parliamentary committee called the Intelligence and Security Committee, which is supposed to oversee the spies' activities. If the spies want to do something which is otherwise illegal, like bug our telephones or intercept our communications, then they have to get the prior written permission of their political masters, which is either the Home Secretary, the Foreign Secretary, or the Prime Minister. And there are various bodies that are supposed to hold them to account every year. Various commissioners go in and have a look through their records and say, yes, jolly good show, chaps, you've been doing a very good job and it's all legal. And there's even something called the Complaints Tribunal, where if you feel you've been spied on unnecessarily, you can go to it. So that all sounds great. It's hunky-dory within a democracy. The trouble is it can be gamed from the inside and none of it works. The ISC, the Intelligence and Security Committee in Parliament, has routinely in its 20 years history, and it's only been there for 20 years out of the spies' 100-year existence, it has routinely been lied to by top spies and by top policemen. And these people have admitted it now. It has not had the powers to investigate operational wrongdoing. It could only look at policy, finance and administration until this year. This year now they have new powers where they can go in and look at operational issues. But I'm not holding my breath because the chair of the ISC is a man called Sir Malcolm Rifkind, and he was one of the first people in politics to spring to the defence of GCHQ when the Snowden revelations began last year. He said, oh, of course they're all legal, it's all proportionate. So I'm not holding my breath, he's really going to hold the spies to account.
You know, here in the U.S., a lot of people have speculated, I guess, through revelations from Bill Binney, other whistleblowers, that the NSA holds a disproportionate kind of influence on the rest of the bodies of government here. Would you say GCHQ works in the same way?
Absolutely. Well, we have three key intelligence agencies, GCHQ, which is like the NSA, MI6, which is like the CIA, and MI5, which actually is not the FBI. It's more like the Stasi from East Germany because we have a national crime agency, which is the FBI. So it's a bit of a hangover from history. But all three of those agencies, and particularly MI5, has had an inordinate degree of leverage over our political classes for decades. And the reason I say that is because they used to gather files on people who then became politicians. So if there was a general election, they would check everyone who was standing for election in that year. If they had a file, that file would be pulled out and it would be reviewed and a report would be written to the head of that parliamentary party. So, for example, if a party wins and that person might be put in government and they might be deemed to be a national security risk, then they will be blocked from that appointment. So all these MPs are aware that they might have files on them. All of them are aware they're not allowed to see those files. And all of them are very aware that if they step out of line and don't give the spies the powers and the resources that they demand, then nasty little stories could appear in the British media about them. And most MPs, most of our elected representatives have some little guilty secrets floating around somewhere, be it, you know, expenses fiddling or kiddie fiddling or, you know, mistresses or lovers or whatever. So they're very wary of taking on the intelligence agencies.
In a recent interview you gave, you said that although we're living in a very complex world, there are some simple steps that we can take, both the governments and the citizens, to protect our democratic and basic right to privacy. Where do we start?
Very good question again. Obviously, as citizens, we can still lobby our governments to try and change the laws and crack down on the spies and hold them to account, either at the European level or the national level. But even if we put new laws in place, then we can't guarantee that the spies will adhere to them because of the lack of real oversight. So that's one problem. But it's still worth trying to do to show that we live in a democracy. However, because we can't guarantee that our governments can protect our privacy, we have to do it ourselves. There are a few basic simple steps. One is get off the proprietary closed American software. Don't use your Apple. Get off Microsoft. Don't use Windows. I mean, who would want to use that these days anyway? It's awful. Use open source software, because that's designed by the geeks as a community project, and the code is open, so they can check whatever is written. So if any nasty little backdoors get put in by the NSA or by GCHQ, they will find them and they will eradicate them. So that's at least one step. Then, of course, you can use very good encryption on your computer, PGP encryption, download it off the internet, which is uncrackable still, according to Edward Snowden. You can also browse privately on the internet by using things like Tor, the onion router. Again, you can find information about that out there. And you can have a sort of discrete setup on your computer by using a program called Tails. Now, all these are great, and they certainly make people think about the issue of privacy, why it's so fundamental to our democratic way of life. However, one of the other aspects that Snowden did disclose is that all hardware post-2008, by which I mean computers, laptops, USB cables, whatever, might already have backdoors built in by the NSA during the manufacture. So, in fact, anything we've bought since 2008, the hardware itself might be compromised. So there is a ragingly active market in second-hand computers going on at the moment among geek circles in Europe.
All right, Annie Machon, former MI5 officer, thank you so much for coming on. Although the NSA has dominated headlines when it comes to the spying on the world, its British counterpart, GCHQ, is just as complicit in the illegal surveillance grid. But it's not just the collection and storage of private data, it's also the shaping of our online experience. According to recently released documents by whistleblower Edward Snowden, British spies are using sophisticated tools to manipulate online content. Through these documents, we've learned that the agency can artificially increase traffic to a website, alter poll results, and even geolocate the IPs within an entire city. Yet despite the growing outrage in the UK over the extent of collaborative surveillance with US spy agencies, the British Parliament is rushing through last week displayed anti-NSA imagery onto the US Embassy in Berlin in protest. So to break all of that down, I was joined earlier by former MI5 officer and whistleblower Annie Machon. I first asked her what German officials are doing in response to this egregious US government spying overreach.
Well, they've had a series of hearings at the Bundestag, and they've taken evidence from some of the earlier NSA whistleblowers like Bill Binney and Thomas Drake.
Legislation that further expands its surveillance powers. And nearby in Germany, the international outrage over the NSA has recently peaked as allegations surfaced implicating 2 German government employees in a spying operation run by U.S. intelligence. In response, German Chancellor Angela Merkel ordered that the U.S.'s top CIA official immediately leave the country. The ongoing NSA leaks are also emboldening German citizens who
So they are investigating it with quite some thoroughness. And I think this is seen as a threat, actually, certainly by the USA, because they recruited a spy from the German intelligence community to feed back what was going on within this committee hearing. So they are taking it seriously. I think the Germans are taking it seriously because they have to be seen to be doing so, because there's been such an outpouring of anger from the German people. Of course, within living memory, we've had both